I do want to kick this one off with the question that I've got, which is just to sort of wind us back to the really large perspective here and see where we are trying to get to in the next 50 years, even. We have a massive challenge ahead of us, and even the Christchurch City Council has set the bar really high on top of the Paris Accord, New Zealand's goals as a nation, and so forth, of really reducing our carbon emissions to net zero by 2045. And in this really massive challenge, the ocean is going to play a huge part in this, and all the sectors that connect to it. So if each of you had one thing to take away from it, and one point that you would absolutely love to see change, and one fulcrum in that problem, what would it be? Yeah, if you had to, in reaching our climate obligations as a nation, and in looking at the marine sector, what would be the first piece of the problem that you would take on, or the greatest that matters most to you?
Yeah, I'm going to come back to the ocean literacy piece, and as a population globally, we need to understand a lot of it is scientific level, and we need to get it to the mainstream audience that are actually going to make the biggest difference in their everyday lives and how they act on it.
Thank you. I think perhaps it's vitally important to make those connections between oceans and climate at the policy and legal level. So I think one of the gaps currently, both internationally and nationally, is that the relevant sort of legal and policy regimes are often quite separate. So the climate change regime has done relatively little in the ocean space, although that has changed over the last couple of years. And there isn't a sort of an overarching body or framework which allows for significant climate action in the ocean space. So I think one of the major changes I would like to see is those real connections that are being made. So actually when you're thinking about marine protected areas, for example, actually actively thinking about them in terms of their climate consequences with respect to sequestration, as well as coastal protection, as well as adaptation. So actually making that link much stronger and coming through in a sort of a policy and legal space.
Yeah, and I also think, climate change can almost seem like something that's in the future, and so I think having increased research that shows us the effects that we're having now, and I think we're seeing that at the moment, particularly with the oceans warming, and we're seeing seabird species, particularly when they're breeding and they're tied to the land for that period of time, that they're having to go much further ashore to get the food, because in the warm seas they don't provide as much food. So I think being able to highlight that those events are happening now, we're seeing starvation of some species in the warmer years. I think that would be really useful. And I think not just that, particularly us in developing worlds, like there's things that we can do as individuals, and just by the sheer number of us, that will always make a difference. But I think also not forgetting that big picture about companies and international policies and law.
2 points I think come to mind in terms of this question. I think a really good example of I guess some of the thinking that's been done on this is the Whakaora catchment plan, in terms of how the relationship that comes from the land all the way down to sea and how that's approached. And I think even deeper into that, it's also the way that it's designed is based on not just those outcomes, but also how we as the people able to enact those things come together and mobilise in those spaces. But on another wider scale, in terms of what I do, I'm a filmmaker, so one of the other approaches or attacks that I have is sharing these types of stories, and an example of that is the Kororatahi documentary that we will be premiering tomorrow. So I think these are kind of the way that I see kind of an opportunity to build on these types of rhetorics, and yeah, I think that my answer.
Thanks, Kerepeti. Coming through in the questions, MPIs are coming to the top here. And so a lot of people are asking, how do we, considering that we're at 0.4% of marine protection in our EEZ, how do we get that up to that target of 30%? By 2030, we've got about 9 years to do it. How do we get there, Karen?
Well, I think if I had an absolute answer to that, I would be paid more than I am now. I think it's a really tough target, and I think it really is interesting that this is an area that New Zealand is doing quite poorly. But that's partly because it's actually also been quite honest about what an MPA means. So it does have quite significant benefit protection areas, which essentially is taken out of the formal sort of MPA category. So there's kind of an element of honesty, and that's why actually partly we're looking as poor as we are. In terms of how we get there, I think one of the things for me which I think is problematic is thinking about MPAs and the process of creating MPAs in isolation from oceans policy more generally. And I think it actually needs to be integrated into a much more sort of thoughtful and forward-thinking policy. And in terms of, well, how do MPAs actually support other forms of spatial management and other forms of conservation measures? And I think a really key sort of process point going forward is actually collaborating. And this is very much collaborating with iwi, which have particular views in relation to MPAs. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that protected areas are not always entirely consistent with Maori worldviews. So I think it's really important to work with iwis, and it's also important to work with commercial entities, including fishermen. So I think actually a collaborative approach. But I think we're going to struggle if we simply attempt to sort of pick off isolated issues. I would like to see New Zealand thinking about oceans policy, protecting and indeed exploiting our oceans in a much more holistic way, and MPAs being part of that process.
Cheers. And maybe to sort of flush this out, and because I think you're pinning on something really good there, Karen, which is this sort of interdisciplinary and also inter-industry thinking, and that we've tried through the past through sort of more traditional conservation methods, more traditional industrial methods, and so on. We end up working in silos, and the problem doesn't actually get fixed for anyone across the board. So just for all of you, where do you see some of those really exciting collaborations happening in your own work? How are those relationships unfolding?
Well, this is a small example, but it's a local one, and I think it's the way that we're seeing some really good interagency work around the Aotearoa Harbour at the boat ramps. Previously, if you'd have gone to the boat ramps, you would have seen a whole ad hoc variety of different signage from different agencies, organisations, and iwi that were just a blur, and we've worked together really hard in the last couple of years. And if you're in Aotearoa, go to a bow ramp, and we've now got, I think, some quite stunning information for people. So I think that it's been a really good basis for collaboration and a good way to go forward on other projects too.
Great. Well, I think what we're gonna try and do is bite off one, maybe two more questions here, and then I think what we're gonna do is pass it on to Stephen and our other folks here, just to make sure that we keep moving through this, and then we've got some time to talk at the end of it all. So I do want to. There's one question coming up here, which I think is really interesting actually, which is sort of playing off of the relationship between citizen science, ocean literacy, and sort of as individuals, what can we bring to this picture? is how can recreational divers take part in conservation work through citizen science and health?
Obviously, I don't know any particular examples at the moment, but one example that we're working towards at the International Antarctic Centre is with Gateway Antarctica, and Michelle LaRue's in the room. And it's kind of like how we as a workforce have been forced to work virtually through Zoom. Well, scientists are facing the same issues with the work that they're doing, and satellite imagery is the only way that they can count penguin populations down in Antarctica at present. So a really interactive way that we think visitors can become citizen scientists and spread the word is by counting penguins on a display screen whilst at the International Antarctic Centre. And it only takes little examples like that to flick those light bulbs, and then they understand the contribution that they're making to the bigger picture. And then obviously that just continues to grow and evolve as we all work collaboratively together.
Just to get to one more of these before we pass it on, we have a question for Leanne here, but I'm going to skip that because she's had to duck away to another event, I'm afraid. But Leanne, how supportive of this work do you think other mayors and councillors are in the region? I eagerly await your response to that at Blue Cradle emails. But also we have a question here that Kerepeti, you might be really well placed to answer, which is how are local rangatahi being encouraged to be stewards of our moana in Aotearoa, and are there programs in place that allow them to take part in being stewards and help guide them through that journey?
I guess, to my knowledge, I don't know of specific programs that are catering to these specific areas. However, I know within my own hapū, we're in a massive state of social change. So a lot of these themes are what we're talking about in terms of the programs that we'd like to see in the future. Because, like it says, stewardship is a huge element of our linkage back to the place that we're from. So these are absolutely key subjects, but at this point in time, I don't believe there are many options or opportunities to engage in this space.
Well, then that's an opportunity right there, folks, as far as one area that we can continue to work toward holistic solutions around the oceans right here.
Thank you for visiting Tūranga.
Thank you.
The library will be closing in 20 minutes' time.
Oh, that's so kind of you to say. Well, just in the interest of time here, I am going to thank Anita, Todd, Kerepeti, and Karen for joining us. And what we're going to do right now is just wrap up on this section. We're going to pass it over to Stephen Moe and the rest of our speakers to take on a couple of more of these and help round us out for the night. Thank you.